so begins our story of high adventure in the silence of the ocean's floor beneath Bahama seas. But first, our base of operations, the Mako, arrives at Schweitzer's home in Fort Lauderdale. Howard's garage is stacked high with provisions and diving gear. Our diving ship is a comfortable, converted PT boat, 80 feet long and ideally equipped for rugged Gulf Stream cruising. Her skipper, veteran Jordan Klein, discusses tomorrow's weather forecast with Bob Switzer. However, today's high winds and rough seas out in the Gulf Stream don't interest Schnapsy. He couldn't care less. Schnapsy's staying home, but not Howard. He's going, and is he loaded? Skin diver, sailor, fisherman, big game hunter, all-around athlete. Whoops! What did I say? And to think, we're only taking this character along to care for our delicate gear. But at least Schnapsy loves him, you dog.
But honest, Mr. Commentator, he's not always juiced.
But there's work to do. Supplies and equipment for hundreds of meals, hundreds of miles, and hundreds of dives must be stowed aboard. And naturally, Howard's already tired. So off to sleep and pleasant dreams of the island.
It's not the island fair that are calling to me, not the balmy air, nor the tropical sea, but it's a little brown gal in a little grass skirt, in a little grass shack in Hawaii. It isn't Waikiki, not Kamehameha's Sully, nor the Beach Boys Free, or the Ho-O-Mully-Mully, but it's a little brown gal in a little grass skirt, in a little grass shack in Hawaii. Through that island wonderland, she's broken all the Connie's heart. It's not hard to understand, for that Swahine's a gal of port. I'll be leaving soon with the thrill I've enjoyed. It's not the island moon, the fish and the port, but it's a little brown gal in a little grass skirt, in a little grass shack in Hawaii. It's not the island's fair that are calling to me, not the balmy air, nor the tropical sea, but it's a little brown gal in a little grass skirt, in a little grass shack in Hawaii. It isn't Waikiki, not Kamehameha's Sully, nor the Beach Boys Free, or the Ho-O-Mully-Mully, but it's a little brown gal in a little grass skirt, in a little grass shack in Hawaii. Through that island wonderland, she's broken all the Connie's heart.
Howard, you old sea wolf. Ill-humored when he wakes up, no? Schnapsy, this chasing around seems to run in the Schweitzer family.
Dawn, and time to get tanked up. With fuel, that is, for our glass-bottomed diving skiff. Bahama Yacht Basin is considered the world's largest and finest, berthing 450 yachts of all sizes. It offers every conceivable service, from haul-outs to doctors to babysitters. Incidentally, Bahama is also the winter port for Bob Switzer's sleek Matthews Flying Bridge cruiser, the Sea Date III. This is one Bahama junket she is going to miss. We're finally underway, cruising through the famed Venice of America, with its dock for every home and a yacht at almost every dock. This is a far cry from the primitive huts and crude native sailing boats we'll soon be seeing among the 3,200 cays and islands of the Bahamas. These British West Indies stretch over 70,000 square miles of ocean beyond the beautiful blue and deep river of the sea, the Gulf Stream. Our departure from the mainland is by way of Port Everglades and through the inlet with the Gulf Stream and adventure dead ahead.
So, goodbye, USA. The thousands of islands in the Bahamas are bordered on the west by the lower coast of Florida, extend south to Cuba and Haiti, and all the way east to the tiny island of San Salvador, where Columbus first landed in the West Indies. Our first leg is a run of 60 miles across the rough waters of the Gulf Stream, from Fort Lauderdale to a diving spot on the western edge of the Grand Bahama Bank, just a few miles south of the tiny island of Bimini. Swift northerly currents in this mightiest of rivers often meet the southerly winds to build huge square seas which separate the sheep from the goats among boatmen. Sea urchin Paul Switzer certainly seems a bit too apprehensive for an old goat, no? They say we're direct descendants of the ape. Well, here's the living proof. Sea urchin Pete Schweitzer also seems darn anxious to sight land. Actually, it's smoother than we expected. Let's eat while we can. Kirby Chilton, earlier seen as the mop ringer, now home at the range. Here, deep in the hold of the Mako, Kirby performs his culinary wizardry to satisfy the appetites of assorted sea urchins, submarines, skippers, and miscellaneous chiefs and characters. Porpoise on the starboard bow. They're great fun, fast as lightning. These graceful mammals are constructed disturbingly like man. They, too, are supposed to breathe air regularly. Skipper Seldom Decline wonders if he has allowed for enough current drift. But, dead on course, we move from the mile-deep Gulf Stream across its precipitous cliffs to the shallows of the Grand Bahama Bank. The native islanders are generally a friendly, honest, and simple people, proud to be subjects of the Queen, or, as they sometimes put it, British objects. Jordan seldom declines where maidens are involved, but always descends to look over the bottom before diving.
Speaking of bottoms, black bottoms that is, here's Bubbles Bob in the saga of the soggy leotard. The basic equipment for this fastest growing sport in America today is indeed simple. Flippers provide propulsion, snorkels provide air while submerged, and masks provide the picture windows to this weird undersea wonderland. The mask is truly the open sesame. No, Pete's not mad. You're supposed to spit in it. Prevents fogging, you know. Images which appear perfectly clear when viewed through air become only distorted blurs when viewed through water in direct contact with the eye. The air inside a mask molded to the face clarifies vision remarkably. Why all the preparation? It's because Pete wants to continue below the surface what he's been doing for years above. It's called breathing. Snorkels are simply air tubes that permit relaxed floating face down. And now, the claw. This curious design was borrowed from South Sea natives who used grass fins to increase underwater speed. They permit easy movement, leaving arms free. Sea urchins Pete and Paul are itching to get at the denizens of the deep. Modern-day Captain Nemo's ready to do battle below. Jules Verne, on guard. Look out below. Jeez, a near miss on an expensive camera and a cheap operator. Let's hunt fish. Pete's gone with a fin. Paul, go on down and show these skeptical Earth people why we're fascinated by Neptune's fairyland.
The sights on many tropical reefs are awesome to behold. Masses of fish, brilliant coloring, weird vegetation, beautiful coral reefs that let an enemy approach and, as if by magic, tiny fish disappear. Larger fish dart into their favorite holes. Exquisite coloring fades as each creature becomes almost invisible. Once the danger is past, everything returns to norm. Making like an ostrich, we see here the queen triggerfish. Oh, come on, fellas. Just in case you're ever gifted with a parrotfish, here are your instructions. For the fish, buy a tank. For yourself, flippers, snorkel, and mask. They eat absolutely nothing but coral. Isn't this an angelic specimen? Coincidentally, it's an angelfish, enjoying a leisurely swim before dinner. Mr. Williams, dig that foam. Back aboard for a peek at our arsenal. The Florida pole gun at top, the Italian spring gun in the middle, and the arbalete from France. Is your trigger finger itchy? Spring guns are powered, you guessed it, by double-coiled springs, the others by heavy rubber bands. To avoid bending spears, we use detachable heads. The shaft pulls out of the fish, but the head remains embedded on a strong wire leader. Our favorite, the pole gun, cocks very quickly and is handy as a long billy club against unfriendly neighbors. We double cock with 2 rubbers for big babies and real nasty neighbors. This shot is in slow motion. Release your grip, and it takes you with it. Now be patient. This is supposed to be educational. You ram this arbalete in your belly, and you tug for dear life if the shark hasn't already got you. Slow motion firing again. Jeez. Pete, show all these nice people the correct technique for... Pete! Pete! Here is perfect form in a Skinner's approach and jackknife. With minimum splash, the body plummeting straight downward to level out at the fish's own depth. A big amberjack spots Pete as he attempts to approach into good gun range, preferably within 4 feet. But he got away. Let's stalk this grouper quietly. Close on him slowly and try to come alongside. Now, you're too high and too slow. This time the spear strikes home. Watch it at the right. Touché! He's holed, Pete. Go on up for air. Now watch this tug of war. You've got him out, Pete. Nice going. And this, folks, is the challenge and reward of skinning, diving free and battling the fish in his own element. Barracuda, drawn by the scent of blood. Shark, too, may gather swiftly. Big shark pilots, warn of large sharks abad. Another cuda, all scavengers, attracted quickly to wounded fish. Time to get the big shooting iron. This is Bob loading the big spring gun, not Vaslav Nijinsky dancing the ballet comique. Not too formidable a weapon? Well, this baby has 3 notches on its handle, 1 for each shark to its credit. It can drive a shaft through a fair-sized plank. No, the gun didn't blow the hole in that planking. Deep in this hole is a grouper worthy of any gun. However, we've bagged all we can eat today, so let's get back. Here, Liebert's trains for membership in the famous Bottom Scratchers Club, which requires bare-handed capture of a shark. In 16 years, only 9 divers have made it. Our undersea safari returns. Though we lack the pith helmets and mosquito netting of the storied tropical hunter, We've seen plenty of jungle today. Fouled anchor. Think you can free it, Pete? Heave. Oh. Heave. Oh. Heave. We must fly the yellow quarantine flag to a Bahama port of entry and stay aboard until clear. As the sun sinks slowly in the west, a proud sea urchin displays his too nice grouper. Bimini ahead, and one thing sure, everyone will sleep soundly tonight. Next morning, we depart across the incredibly beautiful Bimini bar after clearing with the commissioner. Typically British, he quickly checks our papers, welcomes us, and hands us a simple transire, permission to cruise Her Britannic Majesty's Bahama Islands. Overnight, we've pinned down our itinerary. We'll dive nearby on an old concrete wreck, then cross the Grand Bank to the coral reefs off Andros, cruising the tongue of the ocean to Nassau. From there, we cross the Yellow Bank for undersea exploration of the Exuma Cays, then a long run west to Fresh Creek. We'll dive the coral reefs the length of Andros to a latitude below San Salvador and return, visiting native settlements, to survey a tanker wreck off North Andros. From here, we'll again visit New Providence and then back home. We've safely negotiated the tricky, shifting Bimini bar to dive next at the wreck of an old concrete ship. I think seldom decline should be renamed often recline. Notice how excited he is about this old wreck. Howard must be worrying about the bends. He hasn't looked this serious since the time he dropped that bottle of scotch. Approaching our target for today, the ill-starred freighter, the Saponia. During the metal shortage of the First World War, she was built of reinforced concrete. In the last war, she saw service right here as a strafing target for trainer aircraft. All right, let's get everybody into the pool. Bob scans a shallow reef before entering the wreck for pictures. We are disappointed indeed to find the water so turbid when we dive into this forbidding wreckage. However, it's clear enough to reveal the maze of broken concrete and twisted rods that once constituted a proud ship. Tormented shapes loom in the murk. Everything seems encrusted with marine organisms, some of which sting or cut sharply on contact. Woodwork is long since gone, and metal often collapses when touched, but it's too murky for pictures. A bomb! This could be our last scene. What an odd, transparent fish. Is there an ichthyologist in the house?
Why don't you ask me, mister? I know them all.
Debris littered about a wreck is often changed into a fairyland by the sea. We went spearing on the reef while waiting for clear water, lobster for dinner, and plenty of fish for the natives. The Saponia was rent asunder during a wildly raging hurricane. Thus ended her later career as a base for rum runners smuggling liquor into the States during Prohibition. Let's dive into her hold. Deep inside, the silence closes in on us. The world beneath the sea is strangely silent. Its creatures express fear, pain, and joy without audible sound. This age-old round of life and death passes in complete silence, sometimes peacefully, sometimes with great savagery. but always in silence. When a diver uses a compressed air lung, all that he hears are the rasping sounds of his own breath in the air tubes. These shots were all taken while free diving without lung, and the only audible sounds were the diver's heartbeats, sometimes a bit wild, I must admit. How long will it be before the concrete Saponia disappears into the sea? Come on into the chart room with me. We plan to dive next on the beautiful coral reefs which run the length of Andros Island. They border the tongue of the ocean, aptly named because of its tongue-like shape and great depths, in places more than 6,000 feet or 1,000 fathoms. Our course from the wreck takes us past Cat Cay and 100 miles across this huge tableland in the sea, the Bonk. Water is uniformly 6 to 12 feet deep, monotonous to cruise, but for the constant concern that just ahead it might shoal up to 5 feet and a grounding. Hey, Frenchie, gonna spend the whole trip flat on your back? Pete and Pelly, as busy as hungry woodpeckers, removed the thick coral encrustment from 7 bombs we liberated from the wreck. Hey, there's a Navy blimp, boys! Pete, if we just had one more bomb, our Christmas problem would be solved for 4 lucky gals. Wouldn't they make good-looking earrings? Well, he's finally on his feet and making like Annie Oakley. Now, Howard, you're supposed to aim at the pigeons. Howard! Ye gods, man, you'll hang for this.
Shake that devil out of you, just like the boom do. First they build a fire and it gets higher, higher and higher, higher and higher. Then they dance around it and they get wilder, wilder and wilder, till the devil's in the fire. Boom, do da 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 da, boom, do da 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 da. Shake that devil out of you, just like the boom do.
Pete's first over the Andros Coral Reef. Our safari enters the mysterious coral jungle, created through eons of time by countless millions of limestone depositing sea organisms. On the reef's edge, heavy surf causes coral to grow in shapes of tremendous mechanical strength. At porcupine fish, see his weird counter-rotating fins? He bristles with spires, can inflate himself to twice this size. More delicate coral forms, ferns, fans, and lace, grow in better protected water on the inside of the reef. Deep among the toadstool and brain coral forms, we disturb a parrotfish eating coral. Dead limestone shapes are littered among the living fern, brain, toadstool, and staghorn varieties. Kirby, like Bob, blisters quickly in the tropics. He goes the ballet rig one better, though. His has a trapdoor.
Oh, when will these one-eyed Yankees stop peering into my boudoir?
Beautifully camouflaged in black striped uniform, this boy is well dressed for the solitary confinement he seeks from these strange earth people. These weirdly convoluted forms are aggregations of skeletons of untold tons of sea animals, which imprison themselves in limestone on their ancestors' skeletons, each generation adding its layer. Pete, you haven't been listening. The spearhead has gone clear through. No danger of losing this fellow. Underway again, this time to anchor for the night but behind Morgan's Bluff. we cannot know that a howling northeaster will blow up after dark, pounding us until our anchor chain parts and costing us our main anchor. About midnight, we're forced to put out across the tongue of the ocean in the teeth of the gale, hoping to find protection behind Lyford Cay off New Providence Island. However, seas there are raging so high that we cannot cross the bar. Now we must beat our way in darkness up the coast to Nassau Harbor, where we arrive at dawn after an exhausting night of battle with a Bahama norther. This peaceful scene at the Nassau Yacht Haven next morning belies our condition. High seas have swept away valuable deck gear and even smashed our heavy Navy searchlight atop the deck house. But Nassau looks more beautiful than ever. The Mako recuperates at her dock. The ship behind her is under charter to Michael Todd. At great expense from Hollywood, we bring you the glorious Elizabeth Taylor in the flesh. Diving can be wonderful, but it'll never take the place of... Howard's in shock. We'll have to tell him that Elizabeth was a mirage. Thus far, we've been diving without breathing apparatus, simply holding our breath. Believe me, one gulp of air seems very limiting at times. Now we'll use the aqualung, a supply of compressed air, for extending our time underwater. The heart of the aqualung is the demand regulator, an uncanny device which automatically adjusts the flow of air to the diver's needs. Weight belts at the left are used to counteract natural buoyancy, the same problem that Al Capone overcame with cement boots. Air pressure in the tank is a ton per square inch. The regulator reduces pressure to equal the water pressure outside the diver's body. Kirby responds to a little coaxing and a lot of bullying by submerging in the pool with the aqualung. And here's our biggest coup. The sea wolf pretends there's really nothing to it, though he suffers terribly from the bends whenever his mask goes underwater. Paul, you'll never make the frogman's folly with that walk. Gracefully, man. Nassau's history is exciting and violent, a history of naval warfare, piracy and pillaging, buccaneering, slave and blockade running, wrecking and bootlegging. During our Civil War, Nassau was a base for Confederate blockade runners who made huge fortunes. Much of modern Nassau is built on the proceeds of sales to bootleggers during Prohibition. Boys, Liz has gone. Nijinsky again? At the exercise rack? No. Another educational bit to show you the second major type of scuba, or self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. It's the Scott Hydropack with full face mask. Remember, you breathe through the mouthpiece with an aqualung. Here, you encase your entire face tightly and breathe naturally. Wouldn't you hate to run into that in a dark alley? This rig has the advantage that you cannot lose the mouthpiece while fighting fish and can still breathe even if knocked unconscious. Now we go down under the dock. Say, are you an official of the Teamsters Union? He refused to answer. Must be afraid of whisper or confidential. But wasn't he beautifully camouflaged? And here, a committee of congressmen gathered to investigate the recent mysterious explosion of a Navy blimp. Forget your tranquilizer pills? These empty breathing rigs can be a very real burden when you have to swim to or climb back into the boat after a long dive. And to the left, we bring you Norman Echevarria. A bevy of admiring beauties surrounded Norm the last time we saw him in the San Blas Islands. It was on his beautiful schooner, the Gayra, that Norm first introduced Bubbles Bob and the old sea wolf to skin diving and spearing. A fabulous diver, this wonderful South American took us over fantastic reefs. He taught us much of his spearfishing wizardry while we explored the shark-infested waters in the islands off the Pacific coast of South America. Norm has flown in from his native Columbia, and we prepare to shove off from old Nassau.
Everybody sing when the boat pull out. Everybody whistle and laugh and shout. Everybody sing when the boat pull out from Nassau. Everybody sing when they're going away. Some folks wishing that they can say. Everybody sing when the boat pull out from Nassau.
Our course from Nassau to the Exumas takes us southeast across the treacherous yellow bank with its hundreds of dark coral shoals or niggerheads. We are to dive along the Exuma Cays, an almost continuous chain of 365 islands extending 130 miles south of Nassau. They include no mountains, rivers, busy ports, nor settlements of consequence. Still, they're incredibly beautiful anchorages, landlocked harbors, crystal clear waters, and primitive natives make them one of the most colorful cruising grounds in the Northern Hemisphere. Jordan and Bob try to decide which will come first, diving for game fish, exploring sunken wrecks, or probing deep in subterranean caves. While the sea wolf, again, sleeps and dreams.
Everybody loves the hoopty-low, where the low-low is the cow-cow at the hoopty-low. Oh, we throw the net out into the sea, and all the umma come a-swimming to me. Oh, we're going to the hoopty-low, hooky, 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 hooky-low. What a wonderful day for fishing, the old Hawaiian way. And the hooky-low net we're swishing down at old Laie Bay. Oh, we're going to the hooky-low, hooky, 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 hooky-low. Everybody loves the hooky-low, where the low-low is the cow-cow at the hooky-low. Oh, we throw the net out into the sea, and all the umma come a-swimming to me. Oh, we're going to the hooky-low, hooky, 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 hooky-low.
Howard's jumped overboard. Man overboard. Hey, Jordan! Man overboard. There's his hat.
Somebody throw a life ring.
Help! Get the boat hook.
Arm, help!
Lower the dinghy.
Hey, Pete!
Where's the panic button? Give me that thing. What do you want to do? Let the poor man
More like
drown?
it. Haul him in now.
Now haul him in. Our seeing-eye dogs go aloft to make like harpo marks with a horn when they spot coral heads. Piloting here is done entirely by eye, depth judged by color of water. White water is less than a fathom over sand, while pale green normally indicates water of about 2 fathoms. Blue-green usually marks good cruising water of 10 fathoms. Niggerheads appear as dark patches, those dangerously close to the surface being unmistakable. Try the honk, come on!
Ain't no string on the hog, come on.
Well, try the honk anyway. String or no string. String on the honk, come on! The urge to submerge overcomes us again, and we load the skiff for our first diving adventure off Norman's Cay. Jordan wagers he can dive 60 feet without lung. Pete ponders pursuit of Pisces in a piscatorial paradise, while Norm, as usual, is blue from cold, even before he gets wet. Bubbles is set for another of the merry dives of Switzer. On Norman's Reef, tanks and regulators are rigged, and over we go. Bubbles Bob is usually the first one tanked up. He has to be all set down under in order to take his fishy shots of the others. Paul dives excitedly to direct Bob's attention to barracuda. These black-spotted scavengers are always unpredictable. Of nasty disposition, they charge viciously when attacking and slash their victims savagely. Here's a triggerfish, so named because it triggers sharp spines erect on its back to defend itself. Relax, Paul. At the rate you're huffing and puffing, your air won't last 15 minutes. Tiny damselfish, here flashing a brilliant blue, also range in color from drab browns through brilliant pinks to oranges.
Pete cruises bottom with his Hawaiian sling, a combination slingshot and blowgun. Its spear, with no line attached, is ideal for small fish and lobster. Niebert's newest plaything is a sea cucumber, actually a low form of animal. Its intestines are the home of tapered, transparent fish about 5 inches long. We smash a black sea urchin, whose needles are the bane of a diver's existence. Swarms of tiny fish are instantly attracted for their unexpected meal. And here's our next meal, captured barehanded. Not even gloves. Pete stands by while Shutterbug Bob prepares to shoot the big skiff, zooming directly over the camera. And here she comes. Better dip deep, boy, or that prop will slice you in the bias. That Bob, trying again to be a cut-up. There's a big querulous parrotfish, so named because their beak-like teeth resemble those of a parrot. Skinny Dipper Norm must spot something worth spearing. He sure is in a hurry. See that big grouper's tail just off Norm's spear? Come back, you coward. Afraid to die? And here's a doozy. Bob's operating both gun and camera.
The gun's at right. There it goes. And what a thrashing of that as he dives and drives to try to get back into his hole. Rare indeed is the big grouper that doesn't hole up in the rocks after a spearing by a skinner. He burrows deeper as his tormentor surfaces for air. His chief defenses are spines that open like an umbrella into the crevices of his cave. But Pete wins this tug of war. Such battles between holed groupers and divers are perhaps the sportiest, toughest phase of diving without lungs. The Mako, our excursion immersion, is finished for today. Today's submarine safari in the watery jungles off the Exumas has netted us a very nice bag of edible fish and lobster. There's plenty for everyone. Let Pete have his grouper. Now, isn't he an appetizing looking morsel? The hogfish, named for his snout, which opens almost 180 degrees, makes a fine meal when baked. Kirby proves this to us as the sun bids goodnight to Norman's Cay. Next morning, we're off to explore some challenging subterranean caves. Now we wish for powerful underwater floodlights to record the profusion of color often found deep in caverns and seen only with the aid of incandescent lights. But we must probe about them in darkness, for we do not even have waterproof flashlights. As the boys work their way down through the many deep crevices and enter the mouth of the first dark grotto, only cascading bubbles mark their trail. Our eyes become slowly accustomed to the darkness as we grope our way through the labyrinth. I'm sure we're all hoping that no moray eels or sharks reside at this particular address. What's that over there? Looks like a shark. Ah, it's only Jordan with those big, oversized flippers of his. He's lucky I didn't have my gun cocked, else he might now be sporting a rear spear. Wish all you guys would stick together. We certainly should have brought a guideline along and tied everyone to it. Isn't that a weird, enchantingly beautiful sight? Seen from deep in the grotto, the boys climb out of their underworld well, guns trailing along behind. The light is blinding to eyes now well adapted to blackness. We feel like returning invaders who have penetrated some private realm. The Mako beckons us back aboard, thus ending another adventure under the keel with film and reel. Today is Sea Urchin Day, their last aboard. Pete scans the reefs carefully, for they've decided to spear game fish, and the bigger the better. Paul has the urge to submerge today with a lung, to which he's taken quite a fancy. He can now relax with it, using only twice instead of 4 times normal air consumption. Down you go, Pete, dressed in your best cold water vest, all set to woo and win Wiggly. Howard gets the bends on the ladder even before he gets wet. These snapper, though, don't seem perturbed by the horrible vision they must be seeing through the face mask of the sea wolf suffering in agony. Posing like a toe dancer with flippers is not required technique in loading an arbalete, but it works. And undersea hunter Paul stalks his quarry, closing in stealthily for that kill shot behind the gill plate. Sawfish speared same, Paul mutters moodily into his molded mouthpiece. The detachable head buried deep in Paul's grouper pays off again. Fixed heads on rigid shafts very often pull out. Air bubbles are an important guide to lung divers. To play safe, one never ascends faster than his own bubbles rise from the deep. Barracuda. When hungry, this tiger of the sea is known to attack almost anything moving, sometimes killing fish many times its size. Let's go after him. Watch out for those wicked teeth, Norm. He's no Latin lover. The South American got him. Pete, your spearhead's off. This is a kill shot? Oh, no! Liebert's loves lobster. If he's missing, you can usually find him on the bottom, peering under rocks and into crevices for this spiny crawfish. It swims backwards with astonishing speed. This time Pete used his head, spearhead, that is. His groupers hold, and he's winded. This boy's a firm believer in the old saw, if at first you don't, try again. 30 feet down, that was hard work. Hey, Bubbles, you lost your sun pants. Sometimes, when depth is too great, breathing apparatus is the only solution to freeing hold grouper. Take a good look, folks. This is our last underwater shot, of one of the finest young skinners and spearfishermen snorkeling today. Diver extraordinaire, Pete Schweitzer. You're looking at two proud and happy sea urchins with their kill for today. They've forgotten we've radioed for a school bus. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end, at least for school age, fellas. So Pete and Paul fly back to classrooms, two sad sea urchins. And here's what's left of Jordan's whole motley crew. Look at that sea wolf's physique. You should see him tear a phone book in two, page by page. Guy lines fast, we prepare to hoist our diving skiff to the Mako's deck. Jordan is a hard-working skipper. Here he rams enough air into empty tanks to make them lethal rockets should valves break. Bahama charts are based on surveys of 1840 and often bear little resemblance to the areas today. We're heading west across treacherous banks to Andros Island. First landfall will be Fresh Creek. Then we'll run down the coast to dive into some odd ocean holes far inland. Norm readies a new Italian gas gun as we stop near a sunken ship. While Jordan searches for the wreck location, the South American gets wetter and colder by the minute. He'll grin, but he's not happy about these cold tropical waters. Our accomplished skipper has located the blue wreck, so called because everything appears blue when we lung dive down to her depth. Achtung! Here comes a muttonfish, black-spotted, crafty, and fast. He was in perfect spearing range. We'll never catch him now. Cuda, shoot! You missed him. Playtime's over, chicks. And here comes Mama to pluck her wet brood from the lily pond. Say, boys, have you noticed how much weight the old girl has been putting on lately? Seldom Decline couldn't name his ship after his girlfriend, for he naturally has altogether too many. He'd rather invoke the fury of the most ferocious shark, the Mako. She's a fine, seaworthy craft with spacious decks ideally equipped for extended diving with 6 guests. Off the Andros coast, we greet a native family cooking dinner on an open fire on the deck. Fresh Creek, as we cross the shallows after negotiating a cut through the Andros Reef. The waterfront at Coakley Town, one of the largest native settlements on Andros. Fishing boats are beached at high tide for bottom repairs. Chickcharnies still live in trees on Andros Island. Little black men with red eyes, they cast their voodoo spells to control the destiny of naughty children and many superstitious adults as well. This free, open-air shuttle bus transports the natives back and forth across Fresh Creek. Ivan, Bob's good diving friend, has 8 children by 3 women, and he's still a bachelor. Bubbles demonstrates the correct technique for water entry. Let's look through the bottom of the skiff. Stuffed peasant under glass. Below Fresh Creek, the beautiful coloring of the shallow reef is mirrored in the ocean's undersurface. A living coral reef is a fairyland of enchantment, a showcase filled by Neptune with wondrous and mysterious displays, fantastic in form and teeming with sea life. Here forests of staghorns reach toward the surface, seeking the maximum of light and oxygen, provided best by the turbulence of violent wave movements. These hard coral forms, stony in appearance, are encased by trillions of tiny animals, which retract by day into their skeletal houses, extending tentacles by night to gather plankton for food. These softer coral forms, lacking limestone exteriors, are leathery and slimy to touch. White gloves are essential to being technically correct in British waters. You have to start small. Here's the first conquest by the man in the white flannel suit. Beyond the reef, we spot fairer game. Down goes our chief skinny dipper. That grouper's low man on the totem pole, and the frogmen are winded. The Andros reefs are alive with fish. Some frighten easily, others move with judicial deliberation, eyeing these 2-finned intruders with curiosity. The reef may be emptied of fish instantly by one careless, rapid flipper kick, which sets up a sudden pressure wave. A single frightened fish, darting away, will panic hundreds into breakneck flight, the alarm spreading quickly but silently. Then, as if by magic, the reef is barren of fish. Oddly enough, they are not easily frightened by grinding cameras, our shouts, or laughter, but some strange sense responsive to sudden pressure change warns them silently of approaching dangers. Suddenly, we sight a school of hundreds of small barracuda, which seem little disturbed by the cameraman joining them. Larger barracuda range and hunt singly. Though there are many records of attacks on swimmers by this voracious species, some newer books claim they will not attack skin divers unless speared or excited by the scent of blood. I invariably wondered, though, as this particular cuda read that book. Reminds me, I must do my laundry. That paw looks like kissing kin to the claw. Come out, whatever you are. I was sure there had to be something attached. See now why our South American was once washed out of the Corps de Ballet. Here he performs at the plush new Fresh Creek Club, the only white settlement on Andros. It's one of those places you go for a change and a rest. Bellhops get the change and the club the rest. Taxi? Taxi? The local marine railway on any Bahama island is the nearest sandy beach, where at high tide these rugged native boats are heeled over for repairs. It's not uncommon to see them charge onto a shoal under full sail, hit hard, casually put the crew out on the boom's end, heel her over, and kedge, bump, and scrape her across the bar, then sailing off as though nothing had happened. Hey, Jordan, Howard's broken out of the brig again, and he's playing with your blunderbuss. Oh, no! What you expect? A Cupido? Leaving the distress of the sea wolf's latest exploit, we put into Middle Bight to dive into its strange ocean holes. These are inland, supposedly bottomless, but actually connected to the ocean deep by subterranean caverns. A native has led us miles inland to this geological oddity, where water rises and falls in cycle with the tides of the ocean. The snapper here are very wary, for the natives fish these ledges regularly. After spearing dinner by snorkeling, we put on lungs and found bottom at about 70 feet. Our guide, the older man, now tells us of a legendary hole infested with monsters. It's located far to the south in an uninhabited region. Native legend calls it the Shark Hole, for it teems with sharks, moray eels, and other more fearful monsters. One of the local boys dramatizes its horrors, is terrified at our thought of diving in this devil's hole. Native fishermen even refuse to cross it by boat. Finally, the guide agrees to take us south, imploring that we stay away from this hole of terror. We plan to run in the shoal waters between the coast and the barrier reef to see if there's an inside passage all the way south to the curly-cut cays, far below the tip of Andros. If the frightened native will find the hole for us, and if we escape its demons, we intend to run back outside the reef to the birthplace of many of the better native boats in the islands at Lisbon Creek. For several days, we thread our way slowly among coral heads and sandbars, continuing our search. Eureka, the guide had shouted. His fluent Greek surprised us as much as did his finding the place. Jordan decides to mesmerize the monsters and craftily relies on Bubbles' appearance to turn the trick. First dive, we spot a huge moray eel under the ledge. That head is set with razor-sharp teeth, ready to strike viciously at any intruder. We're astounded at the great profusion of fish bordering the deep. Snapper of many varieties predominate, along with jacks, parrotfish, sergeant majors, grouper, and hosts of others. These schools are not spooky or easily frightened, indicating the natives were correct in one respect. This hole is seldom, if ever, fished. But were they right about the monsters? Let's turn on our air and go down and see. Deep in the hole, hordes of snapper ignore our rasping air intake and noisy exhaust bubbles. Layers of fish close in overhead. Millions of fish, cloud upon cloud of fish, give way, separate, and then close in behind us. We're literally buried in fish as we descend till it's too dark for pictures. A big shark came out of the murk, charging straight past us up the cliffside. Having completed the latest edition of Who's Who in the Shark Hole, we too head for the top. By golly, I'm glad that shark didn't charge back down at us. This hole is 20 miles from the ocean. Do you suppose these fish swim all that way through its subterranean outlet? the curious camera peers into a rocky cavern, disturbing a prize Nassau grouper. Look at him go! Discarding the lung, we go down to find that big one. Previously, we'd decided to do no spearing, preferring to leave this strange sanctuary undisturbed. But that big baby was just too tempting. Yellowtail, muttonfish, sheep's head, triggerfish, grunts, but no big grouper. So, let's go back in the hole. Still there. Moray eels are dangerous. If speared, they may attack the spearman viciously. But can you blame them? Stingray flaps its wings like some prehistoric bird in flight. These bat-like creatures are descendants of sharks, bodies flattened by evolution to lie face down under a covering of sand on the bottom. Its tail is a whip-like lash with jagged defensive spines with which it can inflict painful stab wounds on its enemies. Howard, did you enjoy the shark hole? Heading for open sea, we reflect on the legend of the bottomless hole of monsters. True, we found no bottom this trip, but we did prove that its denizens were not demons. Up the coast, our still shaken guide debarks to report to his unbelieving villagers. An unusual two-master, apparently from the lower Caribbean, battles rough water on its way to Nassau. We pass through the reef into the obscure village of Lisbon Creek, home for generations of builders of sturdy native sailboats. Native craftsmen still build their boats with the crudest of tools, by hand and eye, without building plans. Planking is pine, timbers are of horse flesh, ribs and knees are naturally bent crooks from local Madeira trees. At launching time, the entire village turns out to skid her into the creek by sheer weight of numbers. The Educational Center for Children of all ages. One room, one almost illiterate teacher, one worn-out blackboard, no books, no pencils, no paper, no games. Your heart will bleed if you ever visit a school in the out islands of the Bahamas. Our next run is north, most of the length of the fabulous Andros Barrier Reef. We depart Lisbon Creek, dive briefly off North Bight, again off Fresh Creek, and then to the reef near Mastic Point. Here lies the wreck of the heavy tanker Porto Mac. She was hurled high on the barrier reef and broken in two massive sections by the wildly raging hurricane which spread death and disaster through the Bahamas and Florida in 1926. All hands aboard were lost in the 190-mile winds, the highest ever recorded on this continent. We hope to dive inside her holds today, for the sea is calm. Jordan slows the Mako, then reverses engines to set the anchor near the after section of the rusty wreckage. Bob's cruiser, Sea Date the Third, has been attracted many times before to this derelict tomb, but always the seas were pounding heavily or the surge too great to risk diving inside. Howard's really hooked a dandy. Somebody get the big gaff. How about that? Well, here's another excuse for a 5-hour nap. The havoc wrought by hurricane, time, and tide on this once proud ship is staggering. But let's take a closer look through the face mask. Jordan has us all excited with a local legend of a beautiful mermaid with golden hair who lives deep inside the darkened hold. Looks like someone threw the dishwater into the fan. Large fish often gather around wrecks to feed on smaller fish which seek its refuge. On the bottom, the camera seeks the prow of this once sturdy vessel and finds it little damaged. The bow above the surface, though, is almost completely destroyed. Believe it or not, this is the hull, hidden beneath a heavy blanket of coral fernery and marine growths which give it the appearance of a precipitous hillside covered with weeds, rather than the riveted sides of a steel ship. A curious Jack, attracted by our commotion, cruises by to take a close look at those trespassers in his private realm. This is the breakers, where she was torn and twisted in two amidships. Here she resembles a 4-story building shattered by an earthquake. Her jumbled wreckage of plates and machinery litters the reef. Go on inside, you guys. Find that mermaid. What's the matter? Afraid of the dark? No. That's my flipper, stupid.
Oh! Oh!
At the stern, we find her shaft cut through and propeller removed. You can see it must have been a huge one. The camera pans the length of her massive rudder post, indicative of the tremendous size of the steering machinery, which proved so inadequate in coping with the awful tragedy that befell the tanker Porto Mac. We were amazed to find that one of her cargo tanks is still sealed, full of oil. We're also surprised to find that we've gathered some sizable cuts where the swells pushed us against the razor-sharp edges of steel corroded almost as thin as paper. Oddly enough, you seldom feel gashes underwater. The breeze has freshened, and the tongue of the ocean is rough again as we head out for the final adventure of our subsurface safari, a shark hunt. The violent pitching of the sea cannot match the crew's wild dinner tales of sharks I have shunned. Some contend that sharks are just curious. Others say almost cowardly, while still others swear that certain sharks are ruthless man-killers. We all agree they are unpredictable. Jordan located big fish waters, and first dive, we shot a large amberjack. Speared too far back, he towed both Norm and Bob on a real roller coaster ride. Bubbles is determined he must have a shark fighting sequence to end this picture. and urges anyone to spear a shark. Anyone else, that is. While we're waiting, pay attention. Sharks are relics of distant ages, little changed in 100 million years. Their skeletons are of cartilage, as were all others before nature developed hard bones. These indestructible, primeval destroyers have survived without change by evolution, remaining today the same terribly efficient killers of the sea. Norm and Bob speared sharks in what they swear was self-defense in the dark, murky waters of the Pacific off South America. Now, in clear water, they're both anxious to take the offensive. And here, in deep shadow, Norm spotted a big one. He fired at the looming shape under the ledge. Bubbles, too, lets her go, and the wounded shark moves out. We've had thrills galore on the ocean's floor. And now the Mako points her head west for the long trip home. From beneath the bow wave, we send our advice to you. For diversion, try submersion. While on deck, the Sea Wolf adds his postscript.
Not the island fair that are calling to me, not the balmy air, nor the tropical sea, but it's a little brown gal in a little grass skirt, in a little grass shack in Hawaii. It isn't Waikiki, not Kamehameha's Polly, nor the Beach Boys Free, or the Ho'omali, but it's a little brown gal in a little grass skirt, in a little grass shack in Hawaii. Wonderland, she's broken all the Connie's heart. It's not hard to understand, for that Wahine's a gal of port. I'll be leaving soon with the thrill I've enjoyed. It's not the island moon, nor the fish in the port, but it's a little brown gal in a little grass skirt, in a little grass shack in Hawaii. But it's a little brown gal in a little grass skirt, in a little grass shack in Hawaii.